Good morning and welcome to the 24th meeting of the Health and Sport Committee in 2013. Can I remind all of those present that mobile phones, Blackberries, should be turned off as they can often interfere with the sound system. I can also remind people in our panel that some of us are working from iPads, so there's no disrespect there, or we're not checking emails or anything like that. I just think it's worth reminding you of that. The first item on our agenda is a decision to take item 3 in private. And the committee will be aware this is consideration of potential candidates for the post of budget advisor, and also to take in private future consideration of our approach to the budget, which is normal. We'll be likely be doing that on next week's agenda and the report to the Finance Committee when we reach that stage. Our members agreed with that approach. Yes. Thank you. Item number 2 on the agenda is our first evidence session on public bodies joint working Scotland Bill. Can I welcome to the committee Ian Crichton, Chief Executive, Simon Belfer, Director of Finance and Business Services, and Professor Marion Bain, Medical Director, NHS National Services Scotland. And last but not least, Peter Reekie, Director of Finance, the Scottish Futures Trust. Welcome to you all this morning. We move to our first question, and that question is from Gil Patterson.
Thanks very much, Convener. I think from people coming before the committee talking about integration, it comes across that there's certainly goodwill towards the concept of integration, and most people express a need for it to happen. So there's having goodwill in place. I wonder why the government would go for legislation. Does that not break down the goodwill that's needed to make this work?
To look for some clarification, you mean legislation around our particular area or legislation generally?
No, legislation in terms to make joint working function properly.
I think it's unfortunate, but I think it probably shows that government patience of waiting for people to get there themselves is perhaps getting limited. I don't think we need legislation to be able to work together.
Yes,
and,
right.
NSS over the last year has done a lot of work without legislation to improve the way we work with other public bodies. So, but I think the evidence probably of the last decade would be that without a bit of a push, the public sectors find it difficult to integrate.
And yet, again, the committee has heard from all places the good work that's been achieved in Highlands. And, you know, it looks as if there is a way to do it without having to effectively twist folks' arms. Has the government looked at the Highland experience and perhaps maybe overlooked it and put some work in to make the Highland model work rather than bring in legislation to make it effective?
I mean, I'm not an expert in the legislation, but the legislation, as I understand it, provides 2 different models for people to choose from. So I guess one being where you create some kind of body corporate in between 2 existing bodies. I think the other being a model like Highland. But I think the government seems to be quite keen to allow local choice in the way that integration actually happens. I think the role of my body is a little different, which is trying to support that effort, regardless of the choice people make locally.
You just bring up another question, and that's the local choice. And we have 2 models that people can choose from. And if they decide to maybe backslide on any of these choices and can't make their mind up, will the government step in and say, you know, enough is enough, and you'll need to go ahead, and this is the one that we're suggesting, or we're saying this? If you can't choose one, this is the one that you've got to use. Has the government got the balls to do that?
I think that's a matter for the government to comment on.
Okay, thanks very much.
Any other committee member? Rhoda Grant? Oh, sorry. Aileen MacLeod after Rhoda.
Thanks very much, Convener, and thanks very much for coming to the committee this morning. I just wanted to raise a question around, obviously, Part 2 of the bill proposes to enable the National Services Scotland to extend its services to other public bodies, and obviously in June this year the Public Services Reform Functions of the Common Services Agency for the Scottish Health Service Scotland Order 2013 came into force. So we'd just really to ask if you could give us some clarification on whether the provisions in the bill they differ from those that are in the order.
I think that the provisions are largely the same. There are one or two areas where there are some differences, but the idea was that in order to allow us to start having conversations with other parts of the public sector, the reform order was put in place as a sort of as a stopgap, and then actually properly codify it back in the bill. There are a couple of areas where there are some differences, and I think they're ones we'll take up with the people drafting the legislation over the course of time. The definition of services is very slightly different between the two, between the existing reform order and the bill, and the definition of customers is very slightly different. But there are small technical differences that we'll happily take up as the bill is drafted and progressed. I can go into it in detail if you want, but they are largely the same.
Okay, thanks very much. And do you have any plans to extend to other services? I mean,
well, I think what's important probably is to make sure the committee understands why we looked for the Public Service Reform Order in the first place, which was we knew the joint bill was coming, and we know that Scotland will integrate its health and social care over the next decade. So the challenge for us was, if the National Health Service is going to be quite different in future within an integrated landscape, and particularly if there are bodies created in between, it was quite important that we would have the room for manoeuvre to be able to support more broadly. So that was one of the, if you like, key reasons we wanted the Public Service Reform Order. The other is, in a range of the services we provide, we felt we could actually help public bodies make better use of what we've got without generating significant incremental cost. So given current budget constraint, we thought there was some opportunity there as well. So the Public Service Reform Order gave us, if you like, that stopgap to allow us to operate and start to get to know people beyond the health service. This bill really builds on the back of that to enable us in a new Scotland for that to be sort of substantively the case.
and what sort of capacity do you have within the NHS services to be able to do this in terms of extending?
I think it varies depending on the part you look at, because we are a range of many different services. So, I mean, I'm sure the committee already knows, but just so we all have a common view of the spectrum. We have a range of services ranging from Scotland's blood transfusion service across to the Central Legal Office, national procurement. We provide IT services. We're responsible for health information and informatics. So there's quite a broad range of things. So our capability in these different areas varies. So if I give you a couple of examples, if I take the lawyers, the CLO, for us to provide services beyond the NHS, we will probably need to add maybe 1 or 2 or 3 lawyers, depending on what demand is. But we charge people for the work we do on a cost recovery basis. And we don't need to change the systems or the way people are trained or any of those kind of things. So we have something that's kind of ready to go that we can build off. If you compare that with something like our health facilities capability, the kind of nutrition guidelines that Scotland's put a lot of money into that the health service currently use are just as applicable for care homes. So that would be an example where we can use stuff and it costs almost no more. So there's really a variety, depending on the particular service you look at, in terms of how far our capacity can extend or push.
Okay, thanks very much. That's particularly helpful.
Thank you. Rhoda Grant.
Can I just follow on from that? What plans do you have to extend into other areas covered by other public bodies?
I think at the moment I'd say our planning is evolutionary. We've spent the last year getting to know a lot of them because fundamentally what we have wanted to do is provide a helping hand. So we do have constrained capacity and we've been quite keen that it's channeled where it makes sense. So if I talk about some of the activity we've been doing, we've been working with a few local authorities around IT contracts. IT in the public sector can be challenging. It's a very technical thing to buy. The people selling it often understand the market better than the people actually buying it. And we've got very good specialisms in areas such as telecommunications, where we can bring significant benefit to bear. So around IT and contracting, it's somewhere we've been able to work to support local authorities. Probably the best example of that area would be the Scottish Wide Area Network, which is the first element of the McClelland reforms. Very, very technical, complicated procurement. So we've taken lead on that across the whole sector. So I think we would expect that we can continue to play a role supporting the McClelland reforms across Scotland as they roll out. We are in a couple of local authorities helping them with data linkage, because in an integrated Scotland we will want health information to flow across bodies better than it currently does. But there's a lot for us to learn about the way, if you like, local authorities manage information, a lot for them to learn about the way we do it, and we need to start working with other sectors to join that up as well. So that would be another example. But in terms of having a plan that, for instance, we would go after this specific number of bodies and here's how we're going to do it, we don't currently have that.
I suppose I'm trying to get to the bottom of why the legislation is required. What was in place previously that would have prohibited you doing that?
The actions of my body were restricted to the National Health Service. So
that was
we
in
were not allowed to operate beyond the National Health Service.
Okay. So then am I right in assuming that you would only enter into other areas on invitation and joint working? That would be part of the agreement between, say, a local authority and yourselves?
I think there's two elements to it. One is absolutely we need to be invited in. So there's no public body that we would be providing service to who didn't ask for it in terms of local issues, local areas. I think we can provide national expertise but make it available locally. And that's not something that we impose. The other element, if you like, of control over our operations comes through Scottish ministers' discretion around whether or not we can act in a certain area. So if you looked at my local development plan for this year for NSS, there's a specific area that lays out, if you like, the areas that we will be operating in over the next 12 months on behalf of, if you like, Scotland. So the Scottish Wide Area Network example I gave you would be an example of that. But even if you take the Scottish Wide Area Network, the contract is let as a framework, so it doesn't force people onto it who don't want to be there. Everybody who is in that is volunteering.
Just ask, you talked about you operate on a cost recovery basis. That would obviously be something that you would speak about and negotiate with those authorities prior to you carrying out that work.
Again, one of the things that changes with the landscape is whether or not one has a need to tender. Within health, we don't need to tender for the business we provide because of the way the funding flows from the Parliament. If we start operating beyond the health service, that's more complicated, and it's something that both our and Scottish Government lawyers are looking at the moment.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Richard Lyle.
So I want to pursue the IT side.
Richard Lyle. Richard Lyle.
I thought Dr. Simpson had changed his name there. Thank you, convener. Coming from a local authority background, quite a number of councils are quite concerned about this legislation. We all know the reason why the legislation has been put forward, and I think the point you made, Ian, earlier, the frustration of the government, but in regards to social care. Will each area have their own decision on how much they want to put in? Is it all or nothing, or can it be, here's the problem, here's where we're falling down, this is how we're going to fix it, and this is how we're going to work, and we won't be badgering or debating about who's going to pay for it because we're going to put the money into it. Will local areas be able to make their own local decisions, or is everything in social care going into the pot?
Again, I can only talk from our perspective, and very much the way that we are working is providing support where people feel they need it. So if I took an example at the moment within the health service of something that we put together last year, we put together a property framework, Frameworks 2. What Frameworks 2 does is it gives us a list of contractors that we've been able to vet, agree pricing with up front, so we know there's value for money penalty clauses around things being late, delivered, etc. And that framework's then made available to any public body. Previously it would have been health, but it can go beyond that, who want it to be able to draw down off it for their own benefit. But it starts from what they need. If I take something like Central Legal Office again, I mean, we have one non-departmental public body over the summer who's decided to take us on for employment law. They're doing that because they think we can provide a better service than their current lawyers, and we will be cheaper because we're not out to make a profit. And they actually do trust us a little bit because we're in the public sector, which is refreshing and nice to know. Because I think sometimes in the integration debate, we decide that nobody gets on, and I don't subscribe to that. I think everyone we've been working with has actually been positive, supportive. But the key is that we are an option, not imposed.
I think there's two parts to your question. What will go into the sort of the integration pot will be for the local authority and the local health board to decide whether they go down the lead agency model or whether they go down the body corporate model. What part two is doing is allowing us to offer services if requested or required by a body other than the health board. And it also enables a local authority to actually use us. The two are slightly different and separate. It would be a discussion around, well, these are the services we offer, are you interested? And we would have a normal discussion and negotiation and arrangement around those. It's quite different to saying what goes into the integration pot, which is a local authority, local health board thing. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Richard Simpson.
The Richards do confuse. My apologies to my colleague. Yeah, I want to pursue the IT side because, you know, we haven't made the huge mistakes that have been made south of the border in terms of IT, but on the other hand, we have a rather fragmented system. And from your description, we look like we're going to continue to have a very fragmented system. To take two examples, the Sky Store, for example, in Fife cannot be accessed by consultants in Tayside, and that's just an NHS element. You know, once you put health and social care together, then, you know, you're going to have an even greater problem unless there's some degree of agreement on the form of the IT, because we're going to have 32 community health care and social care partnerships, so it's going to be even more fragmented. And if you add to that the fact that we've just wasted £56 million on e-care, not your responsibility, but you know, if you're going to get into that area, the track record on the local authority side isn't all that great either. You know, the e-care after 6-7 years is not delivered and it has failed. And there's a third element to this, and that is the question of privacy and confidentiality for the patient. I have been concerned and continue to be concerned that the I versus Ireland European case on privacy and confidentiality, the terms of that judgment have yet to be met in Scotland because we only have a retrospective system of identifying breaches for confidentiality. And the I versus Ireland Finland case said very clearly that systems of patient consent and to time-limited access should be introduced, and they're not being introduced in Scotland. We are relying on a retrospective system. Now, if we add on social care to that, as well as possibly pharmacy, because that they're looking for access to, and perhaps other prescribers, optometrists, and now podiatrists, you know, the potential for access to confidential information really becomes a major, major issue. So I just wonder if the Act will allow you to be any more prescriptive or directive in terms of ensuring that the principles of confidentiality are maintained and that systems are integrated and speak to each other so we don't have the fragmentation, because those two elements are, you know, at either end of the problem, if you like.
I guess I'll take the initiative and hand off to Marion. I think in that area, as you rightly say, you can really boil it down probably into three key things I think Scotland needs to think about. First is information governance, and you've mentioned the responsibility to patient privacy. There's also the responsibility to make sure if we've got the information, it joins up and it protects people. So there's those two sides of information governance. They're very challenging. Second element as again you quite rightly point out, is there's been extensive systems fragmentation over time, primarily because you have a lot of different bodies who have responsibility for buying what they want. Sometimes they bought the same systems from a supplier who picks each of them off, and sometimes that perhaps boards have bought things that are cheap and therefore cheap, but perhaps not with a lot of resilience behind them. So we have had a fragmented scenario. I would say that over the last 5 years in health, that situation has significantly improved. Patient management systems have seen significant convergence. GP, IT really is separated between two different areas. And so overall, I think what you've seen in the health service itself is a degree of convergence. I think that can be quite useful for what's coming. I think actually more important than the systems, because you can interface systems, is the standards. And I think the big opportunity for Scotland now looking forward is how you make sure you secure decent standards, because if you can sort out those standards, it doesn't matter whether people have different IT systems. At least they're all operating to the same level and doing the same kind of things. And again, I think we've made some progress there, but I think there's more to be made. And I'd particularly welcome, given we tend to support a lot of it, more direction around standards. And I think McClelland gives Scotland the opportunity to do some of that. But Marion knows more than I will ever know around the IG space. So.
Well, certainly, like Ian, I agree with all the comments that you've made, and you know, we know that that's been an issue over many years. I think probably in answer to your question, I don't think it's not our role to be prescriptive about these sorts of things, but what the bill does allow us to do is it allows us to be supportive in moving the agenda forward. And actually it's a really good example of why, as an organisation, we are so keen to be involved in this space. So, for example, at the moment, within the health service, part of our role is not just to bring the specialist IT expertise, but to put that alongside the information governance. So those go hand in hand in the part of our organisation that deals with IT. So we have information governance specialists as well as IT specialists alongside clinical input, which allows us to actually have systems that provide what people need for caring for patients. So that's the sort of area where, having built that up as an area of support to the NHS, it seems a natural way that we could support the broader health of Scotland by being able to apply that with that whole health and social care agenda, so that we can get that safe sharing of information for the benefit of the public, with everyone having the confidence that confidentiality is being adequately considered. So in lots of ways it's a really good example of why both the work that's been done already and this bill, why we're very keen on it in NSS, because we feel it's an area where we can take some of the things which we're already established in, which have real benefit, and allow them to be applied more widely.
Well, I look forward to that.
Richard, Bob Doris and then Mark MacDonald.
Thanks, Convener. Can I ask us a tiny supplementary to Richard Simpson? Just thinking about where National Services Scotland fit into this before health and social care integration, because there's still a lot of fragmentation with IT systems within the health service. This bill won't change that. It's more about how you can use some of the good work you're currently doing with local authorities and perhaps other public bodies as well. That I understand. But local decision making, do you think there should always be the ability to do some local decision making in terms of IT systems? A nation of what, 5.3 million people, 14 health boards, but they still have their own ability to buy 14 IT systems. Surely to goodness, as we move forward, there should be some central coordination here.
I think it comes back, I mentioned standards, and I think standards are more important than systems. What you require to run, say, your hospital and community resources in Orkney, I think will be quite different to what you need to run Glasgow. So I think there's a danger in centrally prescribing everything. I think the centre needs to get better at having a clearer strategy. There is an e-health strategy board. I think that needs to increasingly be clearer about, if you like, our route map. But I do think there's been clarity in recent years. But I think there'd be a real danger in prescribing everything from the centre. I think, as with most things in life, there's a balance. And that balance, I think, is making sure everyone is clear about the standards. And then as people go to market to procure, a body like mine can be really useful, because we have some real heavy hitters with expertise around making these kind of procurements to make sure that they're done properly. and we're used to supporting the health boards in that space.
Okay, now I'm not going to indulge and ask any further supplementaries on that, but it is an area of interest. What I did want to ask about was in relation to the different corporate structures that will emerge from health and social care integration, particularly for health boards, which I was unaware of until I started looking at some more details of the bill. I have to admit, apparently, and I don't know the details, of what Mr Reekie might be able to help us in terms of the disposal of surplus assets for health boards. What are the current constraints, and how will some of the provisions within health and social care integration address some of those constraints?
There's a couple of things in there in part 3 that are very relevant to this, as you know. On disposals, the thing that we're particularly keen on is to see health boards and local authorities be able to work a lot more closely together on their property strategies, and that would include both building new facilities and disposing of facilities that are no longer needed. In the disposals area, which you asked about, there is often an ability to get a better deal on the disposal of assets by bringing packages of things together that are more interesting to partners in the private sector for development. Now, it can also be the case that for historic reasons, different bits of the public sector, and you probably are aware of this from your own localities, own parcels of land next to each other, but they're owned a health centre next to a council office or something like that. If we find that those become surplus because of a reorganisation in a town, in a village, then the ability for a local authority and a health board to enter into a joint venture with a private development partner for the disposal of those assets would potentially increase their value and be of benefit to the public sector. Now, currently, a local authority can go into a limited liability partnership, which is the vehicle, the sort of structure of a corporate structure that the private sector often uses for this. They could enter that structure with the private sector and work out mutually agreeable risk and reward sharing over a period of time to redevelop that property. Health boards, just because of the structure of the current legislation, are not allowed to become a member of one of those limited liability partnerships. If it was set up as a company, they could be in. If it was set up as a limited liability partnership, they couldn't. And that's kind of an anomaly in the current legislative structure. So releasing that anomaly and allowing bodies to work better together in a structure, an LLP, limited liability partnership, that's very well recognised as being a good corporate form for this sort of thing, is just a useful enhancement to what health boards are allowed to do.
Okay, thank you. Also, when preparing for today's meeting, I saw some information that health boards are quite confined about their ability to provide services or enter joint infrastructure agreements with neighbouring health boards, but that will change under this current bill. Again, could you maybe say a little bit more about that, particularly where you think maybe the barriers are at the moment, or even a potential infrastructure venture that couldn't go ahead because of the current arrangements that could go ahead following integration?
So this is again about efficiency, really, making us able to do things commercially as efficiently as possible. In the hub programme, for example, there are a number of reasons why, if you're buying 2 or 3 small health centres, it might make sense to package those up into a bundle. And if we're developing design, build, finance and maintain contracts over a number of years, then the costs of doing a transaction, of the legal advice and the financial advice, and of running that for a period of time are not huge, but they are significant. So if we're able to bundle together 2 or 3 small health centres into a single transaction, that is just plain better value. Now, if all of those 3 health centres are in the same health board area, that's really easy to do. We can have a single contract and it all works really well. If we have a hub territory that spans a number of health board areas, as we do, and there are a couple of health centres in different health board areas that we would like to bundle together, that's more tricky, because one health centre is currently not allowed to contract on behalf of the other for the provision of that facility. Now, in the north area, we've actually managed to get around that by having, in Forres, Woodside and Tain, Grampian and NHS Highland are working together and have a single procurement for those 3 health centres. However, we've had to use a slightly complex structure where we have one contract with 2 clients, and that's just caused more legal thinking than would be required if one was able to say, okay, I'll take the lead on this one, I'll contract for those 3 health centres, and then the other health board will be able to occupy one of them afterwards. So it's just a simplification to allow that to happen.
Can I just very briefly, just so I can be clear about it, I represent Glasgow region. In the area of Glasgow region where I stay, there is going to be, via the hub model, Woodside Health Centre is going to be rebuilt via the hub, so is Mary Hill Health Centre. There's one in the south of the city as well, packaged together, I assume, to get the best deal for the public purse. Relative to the venture that you've just described to me, I know nothing's plain sailing in this world, but was that a far easier contract to pull together because it was within the one health board area?
All in one health board, yeah. So a single client makes the contractual structure a lot more easy. They have one contract between one client, i.e. Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board, and one partner, i.e. Hub West Scotland. In the north area, there was talking about the Forres, Woodside and Tain health centres. There was NHS Grampian and NHS Highland trying to bundle projects together. And it's just that ability for one of them to act as a lead would have made that a lot easier.
Final question, Guido, on this, and it's always dangerous to ask a question when you don't know the answer yourself. Currently, if you needed to build a health centre to provide, it was geographically suitable to build a health centre which could provide for patients from 2 different health boards. Is that currently able to do that under the current structures? Does this change with the Health and Social Care Integration Bill? I
think the ability for health boards to provide services to each other is considered separately from this, so that's not my area of expertise, but it is, I know, possible for health boards to provide services, medical services, to patients from out with their own board areas.
A couple of minutes. Is this supplementaries, both supplementaries, follow-ons? Richard Simpson and then Nanette Millen.
I mean, part of the purpose of integration is to try and actually get services provided from physical co-locations as well. I mean, Broxburn and Falthouse, for example, which are quite expensive, but nevertheless they are integrated with social services being provided from the same centre, which is really important. But also, beyond that, having groups like benefits people in as well. So will the legislation allow the flexibility not just for health boards to cooperate, as you've described, but also for local authorities and health boards, and indeed other agencies such as DWP, to conjointly contract for co-located services from one building?
I think that's one of the most powerful points of the Hub programme overall, is that it does allow local public bodies, in particular health boards and local authorities, to procure and occupy facilities together. And there's a couple of really good examples of that already on the ground. So in Wester Hales, not far from here, the Hub South East Scotland has just handed over the Wester Hales Healthy Living Centre, which brings together the NHS Lothian and City of Edinburgh Council, and some third sector organisations, incidentally, in one facility where there will be primary care, there'll be outreach consultant clinics, and there'll also be social care and children and families working together in that single facility. So it's our belief that, in particular through Hub, shared facilities and co-location can be a catalyst for integration and not something that necessarily has to follow along behind. Just to address one of the earlier points as well, in that facility, NHS Lothian is providing the IT across the whole facility, and City of Edinburgh Council is providing the facilities management across the whole facility. So probably 60-40 occupied between the health board and the council, but really good examples of integration being facilitated through that hub arrangement in a shared facility. And members may also be interested to know that in the other side of the country, in Eastwood, we've just worked through Hub West Scotland with Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board, Renfrewshire Council and Architecture and Design Scotland to come up with a reference design with 2 of Scotland's top architects, BDP and Gareth Hoskins, for an integrated health centre, which brings together local authority and primary care in one area. And the results of that reference design will be on our website, so that other areas across Scotland will be able to sort of piggyback on that and use those exemplars as ways of designing buildings to bring services together.
I think that's extremely welcome. And if you're putting together a contract across health boards, this legislation will allow you to do it.
Yeah.
Can you do that across local authorities as well, or can you already do that?
That can already be done across local authorities, between local authorities and health boards, yeah.
But between local authorities and other local authorities?
I believe that's possible, but the overlap between those two is less of an issue for us in hub contracting arrangements.
Right, but if you, for example, have 3 health centres which are now going to be co-located with three services from local authorities, but 2 different local authorities, and 2 different health boards, will the legislation, or the current legislation or the new bill, allow you to put all that together so that the local authorities can also have, the health board can contract on behalf of the other health board, but also on behalf of the 2 local authorities? Because unless we get that full integration, we're only going part way.
I confess to not knowing the detail of the ability of local authorities to act on behalf of each other in the same way that this legislation allows health boards to, but I can find out about that and provide you with some written evidence if you wish.
Good.
I think in the briefing, the legislation enables it, puts the health boards on similar footing to, you know, we can check that out, but similar footing to local authorities. Just sneak in with a supplementary here. In terms of it, we've spoke about co-location here and assets and all of that, but will this enable, for similar powers to the local government, will this enable health authorities to form arm-length companies and things like that, like local authorities do in terms of delivery and leisure and other things? Is this a consequence? It's not envisaged.
It's not envisaged. I don't think that would be a natural consequence of this. The Part 3 of the bill specifically allows health boards to enter into different corporate structures. So, I mean, that's what that really brings, is the possibility to become a member of a limited liability partnership as well as simply a company. They can already co-invest or be part of companies, as in companies at companies. So it just extends that ability to limited liability partnerships and other corporate structures.
Anyone else on that? No? Follow that one through. Nanette,
Thank you. I think I have a regional interest in this issue as well. If I'm right, I think the proposed health centre in Inverurie in Aberdeenshire is to be bundled with another one in Highland. How is the lead board determined in setting up these projects?
There could be a range of factors that goes into that. One would be the board that has progressed furthest with its project in the bundle. It could be the range of skills and experience that sit within the teams of the different health boards, or it could be simply on a value basis as to which of the projects carries the balance of the capital value. But there's no specific arrangements in place.
If the lead boards, once the lead board's chosen, how much impact is there on, say, the time and resource requirements of the lead board in carrying out such a function?
I think that would be very project specific. There's going to be project management and commercial resources required for all of these projects. Overall, the whole is less than the sum of the parts. So if you do this together, then all the boards acting together will need less overall resource than they would if they were acting separately. But there will obviously be a requirement for the lead board to lead on the project management and commercial aspects of the deal. Although running those through Hub, those are minimised compared to a more traditional procurement model because the partner's already in place and a lot of the documentation and commercial agreements are already tied down.
Finally, convener, once the project's complete, the buildings are there. Where does the responsibility for maintenance thereafter lie? Does that remain with the lead board, or is it split between the two boards?
This sort of structure is mainly envisaged for contracts that would be let on a design, build, finance and maintain basis. So the maintenance of the facilities would become the responsibility of the delivery partner for the next 25 years or so.
MacDonald.
Thank you, Convener. I just want to go back slightly to the disposal of assets that was being discussed earlier. Obviously, we've talked about assets in the physical assets, but also assets can also include land and, for example, local authorities. Many local authorities are land rich. I'm not sure how that relates to health boards, if there are health boards out there with large amounts of land on their portfolio. But one of the things that would be quite interesting to know is, where are we in terms of the identification of surplus assets at the moment by health boards, and of those surplus assets, how many of those could potentially be unlocked, if you will, by the legislation that's put before us? Because obviously in a situation where capital monies are tight, one of the ways that you can realise additional capital is through disposal of assets and reinvestment of the capital receipts. So it would be quite interesting to know if there is any work done that has been done to look at where there is surplus capital assets that are not currently disposable as a result of the blockages that you've identified.
There's a lot of work going on the identification of surplus assets, both in individual local authorities and individual health boards. So those bodies now have very good sight of the potential surplus now and surplus in the future assets. Our role really, and what we're trying to deliver here, is a more integrated look at those assets. So we're working with a number of health boards and local authorities on place-based reviews. So looking at a town or an element of a city and looking across the assets of the health board and the local authority to say, if we take those as a whole, which areas would best be developed and which areas would best be disposed of. And it's not that the bodies don't know themselves what they've got or where it is. It's just that by bringing them together, we can sometimes create better value or a more integrated future plan. And I don't have figures for the total ability to increase value through bringing those sort of marriage value between sites together across Scotland. But I can tell you that bringing parcels of land together and elements of assets together often does increase their value. So allowing this to happen can only be a good thing.
So would it be fair to say then that this is less about allowing the disposal of assets that currently cannot be disposed of, but more about maximising the value of those assets by allowing for these kind of arrangements between local authorities, health boards and private sector to take place? So it's more about maximisation than about actually unlocking the disposal.
Yeah, maximisation, but in the process of maximising value or allowing bodies to jointly plan what they want to do and the order of things in investment as well as divestment, then that could make some things possible commercially that wouldn't have been possible commercially before. You know, property developers talk about what's above water and below water, and you know, that waterline moves. So if we can add value to certain sites by bringing them together, they bring them above the waterline. That allows things to happen that wouldn't have been able to happen before. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Are there any other questions from the committee to the panel this morning? Rhoda Grant.
Just going back to something Reekie said earlier about procurement and pulling things together. It's kind of an aside from that. I mean, this is the health committee. We look at health inequalities. Part of health inequalities is the ability to find a job. If you bundle those contracts together over such a huge area, you're actually stopping the local workforce being part of that bidding process. How do you calculate the cost, the entire cost to the public purse, and what is best value for the public purse when you're thinking of maybe building a health centre in Glasgow? How do you make that work available and open to people who actually need that in areas of deprivation?
I don't think it's the case that by bundling projects together, you would affect which individual does the work on the ground at the different sites. So all of our hub companies have to advertise their contracts at a lower level and compete their contracts at a lower level. So that competition for what we call tier 2 contractors will bring the most appropriate and value for money contractor into each individual opportunity. Most of those, at a very high level of those, have gone in the past to local SMEs. The Drumbray project here in Edinburgh had well over 80% of its contracts delivered by local SMEs. And the nature of the construction industry is that some of those packages will be subcontracted out again to very small scale entities that are local to the individual projects, just because that's how the construction industry delivers things. Some packages, for example, M&E, it's important that for the mechanical and electrical, there is a good amount of design integration. There's often some design in that. So that will be done by a larger level contractor that might span a region. That regional contractor is probably able to cover the 3 health centres.
So is that written into the contracting process that they are forced to do that, or do they have to?
The subcontract tendering is written into the contract, as are key performance indicators on community benefits and the jobs and training places delivered on every single project delivered through Hub, yes.
Okay.
Bob and Mark, no, you okay? No. Well, I think there was some you said about what you can do in terms of procurement and things like that. I think so I think that was some of the issues that were being indicated. But but it doesn't. It doesn't. That's not. I suppose what we're asking, and we ask locally. I suppose, when you're evaluating a bid. And we do a lot of that. We give construction partnerships and constituencies, and I recognise the construction industry is right over. People in my constituency will benefit from something in Edinburgh or whatever, and it's free flowing. But we see more and more now construction partnerships locally, where we're acquiring contractors to ensure there'll be a couple of local apprentices, local labour at the appropriate level, etc., etc. And is that something that is prominent, that you seek in every contract and is costed?
Absolutely, it's prominent in every contract, right.
Yeah. Bob?
No, I was going to make a comment, which I'll now still make, but I'll ask a question after it. So having moved into a new house about a year ago now, and the builder's still on site, is that everything that happens with the house is always a subcontractor, often a local subcontractor that does it. And there's only one large construction company in the whole of Scotland that actually has direct staff. Everything else is subbed out, which I think is quite, and usually to local firms, which I think is quite important to put on the record. But given the fact that the hub model is about greater buying power, have you seen the ability to put more community benefit clauses into contracts than before? Has there been an increase in the amount of community benefit you've been able to get because of your increased buying power? So you can drive down price at one end, or you're also driving up community benefit at another end. I'd be quite interested to know if that's been a feature of it.
I think what the hub model does do is that it gives us a long-term relationship with the development partner and the ability to say, this will affect your future workload as well as this individual project. So you must show that you're meeting all of our KPIs on employment and training, not just on the delivery of this contract, but in order to get the future pipeline of work that you want from Hub. So it does deliver better value in cost terms through that, but it also, in my view, delivers better outcomes for communities by linking that long chain of projects together so that people can see where the future work is coming from and plan for that, and plan community partnerships and relationships with subcontract supply chains over a long term in local areas. Yeah.
Can you that's quite, I know there's a bit of a drift in terms of the scope of scrutiny at the moment, but thank you, that's very helpful.
Yeah. But you do evaluate and monitor those outcomes.
Indeed we do, yeah.
You may want to share that with us that would be interesting.
Yeah.
I think that's all of the questions that we have this morning. Can I thank you all on behalf of the committee for your time here this morning, and there's a first evidence session, many more to come. Thank you all. Thank you. previously agreed, we now go into private session.